Yeah, I mean, the idea of unity strikes me as something interesting, like an interesting concept. So when I think about philosophy, oftentimes I think of sort of unifying principles, something that brings everything together into something intelligible. But at the same time, I also see the passage where it says it overpowers intelligence. So in some way, like I can see philosophy sort of being something of the passions as well. I'm not sure if that's something that we can relate to it. But for me, I'm largely interested in things like existential philosophy, for instance. And as you mentioned, this concept of Eros kind of goes beyond that cold, calculating way of thinking. Um, so yeah, it does speak to me in a certain sense. Um, but I'm not sure it's maybe the most relevant concept for understanding philosophy. I think there's elements in there that are important.
Right.
Um, but I think as we go through some of the other principles, we're going to get or the other definitions of love, we're going to get a better picture, a more unified picture, maybe.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I think the idea of unification is quite important, especially when it comes to sort of the feminine principle and the masculine. I think that sheds some light on philosophy, but I'm interested kind of to see more what some of the other philosophers have to say about this.
Right. Yeah. I know. I mean, I think you've underscored some interesting themes here. That I think Eros here is being depicted as a unifier, a bringing together of the gods who are responsible for the genesis of the cosmos. So he's Eros in this passage is kind of an orchestrator of the coming together of the cosmos, the bringing together of the procreative masculine, feminine principles. Um, and so I think that's interesting. How this translates into how we better understand philosophy. I think I can kind of see in some senses how it might relate. You know, I
Yeah,
think the philosopher is naturally um, attracted to or drawn to wisdom, um, uh, theory, and practical principles too. So we might say he's the philosopher is in some sense maybe possessed by Eros. He's um, possessed by his passion to pursue wisdom that overrides maybe even um, his rational faculties. You know, his maybe that might relate to his mental functioning and more cognitive functioning. Um, we typically kind of view philosophers, in some sense at least, as kind of being champions of reason, and we view them as kind of being totally. In some depends on the philosophers we're talking about, of course, but when it comes to thinking of the Greeks, some people kind of think of them as just kind of being hyper rational, which I think might be a misconception. And as we go along, I think it'll probably be revealed to us that the Greeks were actually quite balanced between, the erotic and more of the logical and rational sides of their nature. Um,
I guess it kind of depends on what we mean by intelligence. Sometimes I think love, in the sense that we're understanding here, can overpower some of our other instincts, some of our maybe some instincts that are maybe more rational to follow in certain circumstances. So again, I think it also depends on how we understand intelligence in this sense, because it says, it's an energy which seems capable of overpowering intelligence. So what do we mean by intelligence? I mean, that's kind of up for debate. I'm also curious what you think about philosophy. Is it more of a creative endeavor, or is it something that is philosophy something that we discover? Are we discovering principles, or are we creating principles? Because if we're viewing it from more of a creative perspective, the act of philosophy can almost be seen as this sort of unification of this more rational, perhaps masculine side of ourselves, and the more feminine, maybe creative side. So it's not something that's purely rational, but it's also not something that's purely, guided by, the passions either.
Right.
Maybe it's somewhere, some sort of unification of these in some sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a good point you've made there, because you're now bringing this back to, human nature and human psychology. And I think what I'm hearing you say is that, we have this dual nature in some sense, where we're rational beings, but we're also passional beings. And it would seem that Eros reconciles these two aspects of our nature. And maybe by doing so, we become fully integrated with our rational and passional nature, so that we're fully functioning in unison with those parts of ourselves. Because you'll observe in certain people, I guess, they're excessively rational, and they put a lopsided importance on their rationality, and they're always trying to see the logic in everything, and make sense of everything logically, and they want precise statistics, and they want to have they want to know the probabilities of certain outcomes, and they're striving for certainty maybe. And then on the other hand, you have maybe people who are excessively passional in nature, and they're very feely and they're very intuitive, and everything's kind of fuzzy, and there's lots of ambiguity, and
I kind of bring this back to Apollo and Dionysus.
Sure. I mean, you can always bring it back to them, because I think they're good representations of these aspects of our natures. Then maybe they're not simply that. Maybe they're archetypes too, that might have an independent existence. Maybe they're daemons or something that take possession of us, like Eros seems to. But I think it's a useful principle, and it's one which I think can explain how these two aspects of our nature can become unified. And I think in some sense, it's a healthy unification, because just viewing things kind of as in a balanced way, I think if proper human functioning is kind of a balance of the forces within us, I think Eros has the ability to create that balance between reason and passion.